So, first of all, welcome, Eric, Dr. Eric Helms. Thank you so much for being on my podcast. It's a huge honor for me. I don't know if you're aware of this. I'm pretty sure you don't know who I am, but we all know who you are. And it has been requested for years now. I did a podcast with Jeff Nippard in 2015 or 16. And ever since, people are get Eric Helms. But then I was not very active, so now I'm here, and I just couldn't sleep one night, and I just decided to message you randomly. I messaged you, I messaged Omar as well. So you got back to me, and I was very happy with that. So thank you so much. It's a pleasure for me, and I hope you have a good time, and I can put forward some good questions to you.
Yeah, man. Thanks for having me on. It's an honor to be here. Happy to help, and it's very cool to hear that this is something you've been trying to do. So that's definitely always an honor to hear. Appreciate it.
All right, all right. So the plan here is I don't want to go deep into any topics because you're someone who has your own podcast as well, Iron Culture podcast. So there are topics that you discuss over there which are which goes deep into many topics. So here I want to discuss things that kind of might help my audience. So
Hmm.
the first thing that I would like to discuss is regarding the beginner training frequency and volume. Now, this is a question that I get a lot where people ask me, I've just been going to the gym for a couple of months. What are the types of training protocols that I need to follow? Should I be training 15 sets per workout? Should I be
Hmm.
training 20 sets? Should I be training 10 sets? Should I be training a muscle twice a week, once a week, thrice a week? So this is a question that I get a lot. So what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think when you're in the first couple months, I think it's really important to just emphasize something that gets you the most consistency. Because even if you're in the ballpark of reasonable, you're going to be pretty much maxing out the gains you can make as a novice because, hey, like progressive overload, that's the key. And everything you're doing right now is progressive overload because you weren't training at all before. So I think, honestly, anywhere in the range of like, if we're talking people who are taking this seriously, but they don't have like competitive aspirations, anywhere in the range to 2 to 4 days per week is really sufficient. And if you are doing fewer sessions per week, you're probably going to have to train, more muscle groups per session if we're talking about like a bodybuilding focus. So if you're only coming in the gym twice per week, that's probably you pretty much decided that's going to be an upper and a lower, or it's going to be two full body sessions. And I think a general thing to do is to stick with a sufficient but relatively low total volume because you don't need much as a beginner. You really don't. And then only once you've plateaued and you're not able to come to the gym and see progress on the lifts that you're using, that's when you would probably want to bump up the volume. Um, so, your typical split might be upper, lower, full body, 3 days per week. And then you can have a little more volume on the upper and the lower with a few more isolation movements on those days. And then you focus a little more on compound movements on that full body day. Generally, what you want to make sure you have included is a horizontal press, a horizontal pull, a vertical press, a vertical pull, and then some type of hip hinge and some type of squat with really liberal interpretations of what those all mean. So if you like incline, that can be your horizontal press. If you like RDLs, but not deadlifts from the floor, that can be your hinge. If you're afraid of deadlifts, or you don't feel like you have a good coach to teach you how to do them and you're nervous about that, a weighted back extension is totally fine. If you are tall and you have poor ankle mobility and you don't like squatting and you feel like people are watching you or it's a hassle to fight for a squat rack in your gym, jump on the leg press. That's all good. You really only have to do a specific movement, not one of those categories I said, if you want to get stronger at that movement. Like if you want to be a power lifter, well, you got to do the sport, of bench squat and deadlift. So ultimately it comes down to finding things that fit into those categories, something that fits into your schedule. And then I would generally recommend starting with a low to moderate volume, somewhere in like say the 4 to 8 sets per muscle group range, and
Per
focus on
week,
high
right?
quality training. Yeah, per week,
Per week.
4 to 8 sets per muscle group per week. And I don't think you need much more than that. Could you get slightly faster gains with doing more? Maybe if you're doing everything right and perfectly, but most of the time you're not. And I would like just to see you focus on getting a good mind muscle connection, having good technique, being able to use a full range of motion, and really just learning how to move properly and safely in the gym. And that's what I'd recommend. And then just focusing on consistent, measurable, but steady increases in progress on a week to week basis. Increasing reps, increasing load when you can, or one or the other, or both, depending on what your goals are. And that's the high level overview. And we can get into more specifics if you want.
All right. And another thing that I get asked a lot is, even I had this question. So the first year of my training, I did not do any kind of squats or deadlifts or bench press. I mean, I did bench press, but I did more of a dumbbell bench. I did not do the whole flat bench. And, of course, I made great gains. Now, like you said, that unless you want to get into the powerlifting side of things in the for the future, do you really think people can still make the same amount of gains? If you take a person X and a person Y, a person X does the traditional so-called big three lifts all the time, and the other person, he just focuses on stimulating his muscles, activating all the right kind of muscles. And if you compare them 1 year from now, do you think both of them will make the same gains, or the person who did the big lifts like the compound lifts and the other person who did just like your bodybuilding type of workouts, who do you think would make more gains if you compare that way?
Well, it really depends on what you mean. So if someone is just focusing on like activating and stimulating and just getting a feel, but they haven't actually induced progressive overload, then definitely the person doing the big lifts.
Right.
But if we're talking about someone who's doing, say, incline dumbbells at a higher rep range, and hammer strength rows, and the other person is doing weighted chin-ups and bench press, but they're both using progressive overload, they're both ensuring that it's sufficient stimulus, there probably wouldn't be much difference at all in
Right.
terms of hypertrophy. It really comes down to, we have to think about we don't gain muscle because we're following the program that aligns with what bodybuilders say is ideal. We gain muscle because we're creating progressive tension overload in the muscles we're trying to grow.
Right.
So if you achieve that, you're going to grow. And you could do that by so many different ways. That's why you see powerlifters with amazing pecs, why you see calisthenics guys who do a ton of different types of push-ups with amazing pecs, and why you also see bodybuilders who maybe don't do bench press at all and only train in the 8+ rep range who have amazing pecs. So ultimately, it comes down to just focusing on those big picture principles and understanding what is actually causing muscle growth.
Right.
And not getting too caught in the weeds, especially when you're a novice and you really just need to focus on those big blocks and consistency.
Right. And a lot of people, they focus too much on the best split. What is the best
Mm.
split for gaining muscle? What is the best split for building strength? But at the end of the day, I think what matters is how you are progressively overloading, especially as a beginner. As long as you are progressively overloading and you're consistent, I don't think the type of split that you're doing matters that much, right? That's what you're saying.
Yeah, it's a much more minor concern. So the way you organize your training throughout the week, whether it's into muscle groups or movements, or whether you like body part splits or upper lower or legs push pull, or like a squat bench deadlift day, and then you do accessory movements, really those are just vehicles for a certain amount of stimulus. And as long as it's logical, you don't get a lot of overlap between days, and you're not trying to overload way too much in a single session. Like the beauty of my recommendation for novices of only doing 4 to 8 sets per week for muscle group is that even if you did all 8 sets in a single session, you might start to get a little bit of a drop off in the quality of that work. Like if you and I thought about it, like, okay, I'm going to do, 3 sets of squats, 3 sets of leg press, and then 2 sets of leg extensions. Yeah, you might start to see like the quality of that work start to go down towards the end, but it wouldn't be that much. And so those concerns of how you distribute your volume and which days you go to failure on versus which ones do you hold back a little bit, and what muscles do you train and how do you move them, like how many days between training sessions do you have, those become much more of a concern when you're an intermediate and like an early stage intermediate trying to move on to the next phase and break plateaus, when you might be playing with twice that volume, like 8 to 15 sets per muscle group, which is still not high volume. It's kind of, moderate to moderately high. And now you're like, well, I'm not going to do 15 sets of quads in a single session. I could, but that's not smart.
Right.
There I'm going to be losing some of the quality of those sets. So it probably makes more sense for me to do like 7 in one, 8 in another, or what have you. And then you have to think about, all right, so how am I going to organize things? But organization matters a whole lot less when there's fewer moving parts, right? Um, but like for myself, I noticed that for me to make relatively consistent progress when I'm in the off season as a bodybuilder, I'm needing closer to like 20 sets for my upper body. And I have to think about that. Like, well, I'm not going to do 20 sets of chest in a single day,
Right.
like that's,
Right.
so how
Yeah.
am I going to split that up? And then, okay, which movements do I want to be freshest for? And where is the overlap? Like if I do a bunch of pressing, I can't, I don't want to do direct tricep work in the next 2 days, or something like that. And so then it just kind of becomes this experience informed and logical based, assessment of, okay, if I do this session like this, how's the next session going to go? And okay, if I do that session, how's the next session going to go? And then how am I going to feel at the end of the week? And how is that going to go for the next week? And then how frequently am I going to need to take a light week? And that's really what kind of programming emerges from when you get to the point where you need to do more total work in a given unit of time.
Yeah, but as a beginner, the best thing about being a beginner is you don't have to think too much. You just need to focus on the most basic things and just do it consistently, right? And another
Yes.
question that I have regarding the same topic is who would you consider an intermediate? So, when does
Yeah.
a beginner go from a beginner to an intermediate? When does that jump?
Yeah.
How would you categorize that?
Yeah, this catches a lot of people up, and it's actually a very important distinction. People love to put each other in boxes and classify themselves and be in this group or that group or in group or out group. Um, you know, there's a lot to be said about groups, but this is a useful a useful way to look at things, because it's a useful thing to look at because you'll make different decisions about what you do in the gym and how you program based upon where you fall. And most of the categorizations that are out there, I think, are really not helpful. In fact, they're counterproductive. Most of the time, what people do is they assess how muscular am I or how strong am I compared to the average person. And of course, the average, for some reason on the internet, is always like a 5'10", 190-pound guy who's been lifting for 2 years. Like,
Yeah,
so sucks if you're a woman, or sucks if you're 5'3" or 6'5", because there's no like,
yeah,
three, like the whole, you should be at least squatting 3 plates. I'm like,
three
well, hold
plates.
on, what if I'm a 5 foot female? Like, that's not a reasonable goal.
Right. Yeah,
So anyway, those random numbers are really not that helpful. And those body weight multipliers really only work until you get really light in weight or really heavy. And then it doesn't allometrically scale, which is actually the way strength scales. So what makes a lot more sense is to think about, well, okay, well, what is the definition of having experience in the gym? And what does it mean to be trained versus untrained? Well, this goes back to what we already talked about. A novice makes rapid gains to some degree, regardless of their program, so long as it is in the realm of reasonableness. So why is that? Well, because they have never had this stimulus before. So it's a novel adaptation. Okay, so then when are you not a novice? It's when that's no longer occurring. Now you need a more specific adaptation to improve. And we can think about this more broadly. Like if you are just completely sedentary and you decide, I want to go run a marathon, if you started cycling and swimming, your marathon time would rapidly improve.
right,
But if you were to take a marathon runner and have him stop training for the marathon and replace all that with cycling and swimming, that marathon runner would get slower,
right,
right?
right,
So it really comes down to what are your prior adaptations? And then
right,
how quickly can you make progress when you're
right,
putting forth a sufficient stimulus? So
right,
I think the best way to categorize a novice is someone who, in the context of a reasonable program, every time you repeat a workout, so typically week to week, you're able to see some form of measurable progress. Adding a rep, adding 2.5 kilos, similar. Doing the same thing, but it feeling easier would also
easier.
count.
Yeah,
Yep. And then when you're an intermediate, it just simply can't happen that fast. Typically, we're looking at, week to week, maybe very small changes on one thing, or like mesocycle to mesocycle. Like if you were to use like that 2 times a week full body plan and you squatted on both days, a novice could probably improve from Tuesday to Friday. An
right,
intermediate might need to wait a week or two, or the next, rotation of that. If they had like a like a pyramid scheme week to week. Like if they're doing, 6 reps, 5 reps, 4 reps, 6 reps, 5 reps, 4 reps. When they went from 6 to 6, it might be more weight. So it'd be like a
Right.
4 week delay.
Right.
So it's kind of like on a microcycle level, on a week to week basis, novices are making progress. On a mesocycle level, intermediates are making progress. So when you're an intermediate based upon how quickly you're able to progress. And this is gym based progress.
Right.
And then an advanced is pretty much anything more than that, where you've got to put together, strings of blocks of training before you can see an improvement. And a lot of the times, any improvement is something that you're happy about.
Right. Right. Right.
So
The
that's generally
first couple
how
of
I
years
advise it.
are, yeah, the first couple of years are, as they say, you make a lot of gains, most of your gains, right? So yeah, I
Absolutely.
think we are pretty clear on the beginner training frequency and volume, and I think a lot of beginners will understand, because the thing is, over here, right, in India, the situation is slightly different. So when you go
Mhm.
to a gym, you have this set routines that most of the people follow, like chest and biceps, back and or triceps or something like that, like, and they make beginners train 6 times a week. And it is hard to convince beginners because they're very excited, right? They're
Mhm.
starting something new, and they can't stick to believing that 8 sets per week per muscle is enough for me. They want to just keep doing more. So just adding to that, what happens if they do more, right? What happens if they do, let's say, like they train like they do 20 sets per muscle per week? What happens then, as a beginner?
It'd probably be fine. So I don't want to scaremonger anybody. Like if I look back at what I did for the first couple of years, I wasn't a huge volume junkie, but I was a huge intensity junkie. So I remember my workout partner Adam and I, we used to feel like if the other one was out of town, we couldn't get a good workout because how am I going to do forced reps, right? So like on our chest and back day, it would be like incline, flat, and dips and flies, which is like 12 sets in one workout. And every set we would go past failure and get a spot. So it's like 30 force reps per workout per muscle group.
Right. So it didn't do any harm, right, as such, other than the fact that you didn't need to do that. That's
It
all.
was unnecessary. It's possible I could have made a little bit faster progress doing something a little more reasonable, and that I was just outpacing my recuperative capacities. But that also changes. Like your ability to handle workload improves as you do more work. It's just that the goal is to grow muscle, not be able to do a bunch of volume, right?
Right.
Like we're not
Right.
CrossFit competitors here. The goal is not to do
Right.
as many burpees in an hour as we can,
Right.
or to see, hey, I did 30 sets on chest. It's like, you want a cookie? Like that wasn't helpful, like
Yeah. Yeah.
after that's the 10th one, you're just doing some strange, very localized cardio for your chest. So
Right. Right.
you could do enough to where you're not able to progress, or it's slowing you down. I think if you're constantly sore, if you are noticing that it takes a complete rotation of getting back to that same day, like if you're following a body part split, this kind of takes care of itself. Like you're talking about how it is in India, which is very similar to how it was maybe 15 years ago here. Like the typical split would be chest and tries, back and buys, legs, shoulders, arms, and then you take the weekend off, right? And that bro split's okay because there's not a whole lot of overlap. And even if you destroy yourself, like if you're in the gym for an hour and a half doing chest and tries, like you might hit 15 sets per muscle group. Excuse me.
No
Then you
problem.
got a week, So
Right. Right. So yeah, so the next topic that I want to move on to is something that's gaining a lot of popularity. I don't know if you've been keeping up with this, which is main gaining. Now, I know that this topic has already been covered. It's just a new name. Main gaining is a new name that's been given to the so-called staying lean while bulking. But Greg Doucette, he's been swearing by this, that it is something that people should be doing, especially people who are natty, right? People who are natural lifters should be doing this. So my question to you would be very simple, that how much muscle do you think you can actually gain on a main gaining phase? And like main gaining, basically in simple words, is you just keep your calories at very close to maintenance. It's more of a body recomposition kind of concept, where you keep your calories at maintenance and you just stay patient and you just keep lifting harder than last time, and you just build muscle. So like, what's your thoughts on this particular topic?
I think if you're intentionally keeping your calories at maintenance, you might run into problems. But if you're just simply eating what you kind of want, assuming that you are someone who, and that's very difficult to say in a modern world, especially in the West, where it's quite easy to overeat. And, we have hyperpalatable food and very low levels of activity. So for the majority of people, eventually they're in a slight surplus all the time. So, but I think if you begin, here's the funny thing. Like if you look at all the research where they simply have two different resistance training programs, or three, or resistance training versus cardio, or resistance training versus nothing, and the people are simply not told to do anything specific with their nutrition, what normally happens is that people gain muscle, and they typically see either a very slight loss in body fat in terms of the actual mass of tissue, a very slight loss, so it's still a net surplus, or they typically see a negligible change in fat mass, which would actually result in a decrease in body fat percentage. Like if you think about it, like let's say in your first 6 months of training, you're 180 pounds and you go to 190 pounds, but you stay at 10% body fat. You have 18 pounds of fat in the first case, you have 19 pounds of fat in the second. You did gain body fat, but you're going to look better, right? 180 pounds at 10% body fat looks less muscular than 190 pounds at 10% body fat.
Right.
So that's like the natural state of things, is that most people, unless they, are trying to manipulate their nutrition in a certain way, are just going to provide the amount of a surplus needed to support their training and probably those initial very quick muscle gain amounts that we've talked about. Now, the bulking and cutting concepts came from competitive bodybuilding, so where you are forced into like cyclical dieting, where you're forced into weight cycling, which is something that, most people will think is kind of unhealthy, right? I have to get down to 4% body fat, which means I then have to get out of being 4% body fat, or my testosterone's in the toilet and I look amazing, but I feel terrible and I can't gain muscle. To then, okay, now I'm just trying not to rapidly gain too much weight. So now I have, and I got to compete next season. So I got, 7 months for me to have a gaining phase. So I better be aggressive. And then I got to diet hard. So I think this is an instance where the recreational bodybuilding community is borrowing things from the people they think are best at gaining muscle, who are, bodybuilders, but are beholden to the structure of their sport, which requires them to bulk and cut. Right. So is it better? Probably not in the long run. I think for the most, is bulking and cutting better? Probably not in the long run for most recreational lifters. That you can just simply do what's always been historically called a gain-taining approach. That's been around. It's been exactly. So it's clean bulking initially. It's just bulking. Basically, yeah. Now the reason I don't use the term clean bulking, even though it's probably the earliest original term, is that it makes you think that you have to eat quote unquote clean foods, which is a problem in and of itself. And then it became like lean bulking, but that gets confused with lean gains, which people then associate with intermittent fasting. So the terminology I use is gain-taining, because it also focuses on the gaining aspect. So you are in a slight surplus, but you're not trying to eat yourself into gains. You're thinking, my training is what's stimulating gains, and my nutrition needs to be permissive to allow those gains to occur. And I think what that often looks like is gaining, say, like no more than like a pound a month. So you're still in a surplus.
Yeah. So the concept that, see, I did dirty bulking like 4 years back when, I was very naive, where I thought the more weight I gain.
Optimistic.
I was optimistic. Yeah. The more weight I gain, the more muscle I'm going to gain. Right. Which, ended up very, in a very terrible manner for me. But I did gain good amount of muscle. It's just that I had to cut down twice I had to cut like 3 months more. But like you said, 1 pound a month, where people a lot of people I see, they focus on bulking for 6 months. They're like, I'm gonna bulk for 6 months, and then I'm going to cut for the summer or shred for the summer. So my thing is, I don't think you can gain a lot of muscle in 6 months, right? Not just muscle. I don't think you can gain a lot of strength as well in 6 months, especially for someone who is not an advanced athlete. When you're an advanced athlete, okay, I can understand if you're trying all these things, but if you say 1 pound a month, that's of course not going to be 1 pound of pure muscle tissue, right? It's also going to be a little bit of water weight and whatnot. So 1 pound a month is for over here it's 500 grams, almost half a kg, right? So
Yeah.
that's slow gains, right? So that's what I wanted to talk to you about, because this term main gaining, it's always been there. It's just a term that's been coined. And the other thing that I wanted to talk to you about regarding this is regarding the whole eating clean. Right now, this is
Mhm.
a huge there's YouTubers talking about insulin this, insulin that, and confusing the shit out of people. And a thing that I wanted to ask is regarding flexible dieting, like eating rice. Rice is like one of the main carb sources over here. And we our country is basically like, I think I mentioned this in the email, that majority of people in our country are vegetarians. So they
Mm.
don't consume any kind of meat. They consume dairy products and all that, but they are vegetarians. So I wanted to ask, how much of an importance does protein have, in building muscle? Because there was a time when this whole vegan thing was becoming popular, and they were saying you don't need a lot of protein, protein is overrated and this and that. So my recommendation to my clients would be, if they are on a very low protein diet, I would gradually increase their protein intake. But is there a certain number? Because there are so many numbers thrown. I watched a video of you with Jeff, where you mentioned that if you can't get enough protein, you can eat according to your height, right? If you're 170 centimeters, you can go with that. But how important is protein, honestly speaking, and what's the lower limit that at least you should be consuming, to make some gains? Or how high can one go? So that's what I wanted
Yeah.
to talk.
That's a great question. And, I think because myself and a lot of my audience are trying to optimize things and they're trying to make progress, they're trying to get everything they can out of their physique. I mean, I'm a competitive natural bodybuilder, right? So I'm very curious about what can be even a small difference, right? But sometimes what gets lost in that conversation of what's optimal is, well, how much of a measurable impact are we talking about here? And to give you some context on the protein conversation, so your audience might be familiar with scientific research. They may not be familiar with the term a meta-analysis. And a meta-analysis is simply when you take all of the studies on a given topic that are similar enough for you to collate their data together, so you have a larger signal to noise ratio and you can make a better conclusion about the data. And this is really important in the sports nutrition field because we're primarily looking at small sample sizes. So, like a 10 versus 10 group. And in something like 2/3 of the research on protein, you see like a null, like you don't see significant differences between a higher protein and a lower protein group. But when you meta-analyze it, you do see a difference. And this speaks to the fact that it is a small effect, so, if only 1/3 of the time we're seeing higher protein beat out lower protein, and 2/3 of the time we're seeing no significant difference. That tells you something right there. Like I have only seen one trial in my whole life where actually a lower protein group had better body composition outcomes than a higher protein group. So that's like 1 out of 1,000. So that's probably just a statistical randomness, right? So, but just because there is a difference doesn't mean that it's a huge difference. And we have to collate all these studies before it's obvious. Like if you just give me a hat of all, like, okay, here's a study where we were lifting weights, they at least 2 different amounts of protein, and we had some measurement of body composition. You pull the study out of the hat and you tell me which group it favored. If I was a betting man, I'd be like, no significant difference. That'd be my guess, because I had probably a 2/3 chance of being right. However, when you pull all that together and say 2018 meta-analysis by Morton and colleagues that I was a part of, this is a common one, you do see a small significant effect favoring higher protein intakes. And typically where the cutoff is, where you stop seeing a benefit, is right around the range of like 1.5, 1.6 grams per kilogram. So that's big. Like if to a Westerner, that doesn't sound large, because we're a bunch of privileged guys who eat a bunch of meat, right? So like, so, the natural state of an omnivorous Westerner is that level or higher. You don't have to manipulate much. Mostly it's just from a lot of, shitty sources. But when you're talking about India, where I would guess that the average national protein intake is probably 0.3, 0.4 grams per kg
Right.
less.
Most people would get, I would say my dad, my mom, they would probably get 50 max per day as
Yeah.
as an average person, like
Yep.
who don't lift. But yeah, that's usually the average number. And even from the clients that I train, the protein intake is very low, and they do work out, right? So
Yeah.
of course there's a reason why they haven't made any gains, because that's too low, right? Like 50 grams is,
Yes.
yeah, that's too
So
low.
there, you're actually skirting with. Hold on, are we actually reaching, the RDA? Are we hitting that 0.8 grams per kg that, like the World Health Organizations and the nutrition councils have decided, hey, this is the amount we need to not actually be losing body mass or dealing with negative health consequences at a population level. So yeah, when you're at 50 grams of protein a day, unless you're weighing, 50 kilograms or less, that's you're skirting with, on some days, not being at what's probably a healthy protein intake. But we've got research where like 1 to 1.2 grams per kg, yeah, they make less gains than someone who's on like 1.6, but they still make gains. So I think there's nothing wrong with simply focusing on where is the person and then going from there. That's why I don't like just giving a blanket recommendation to people, to talk about coming from the other angle. I work with a lot of bodybuilders, and sometimes what the general population would see as a very high protein recommendation, they see as a very low protein recommendation.
Right.
So I worked with this gal who was actually like a Miss Natural Olympia winner, and she was regularly consuming between 3 to 4 grams per kg of protein, and which is not like, it's not harmful or anything like that. But it was at the point where it was taking her carbohydrates and fats low with her training volume and with her body fat levels that I was like, man, I would really like to see you start to consume more carbs and fats. But emotionally, she's a highly successful bodybuilder. This is what I'm doing. It's worked. The previous person I consulted with is like an IFBB pro, and they said, this is the way to go. This is what everybody's doing. So I was dealing with a lot of tradition and the scary emotional risk of, I'm winning right now. Yes, I'm talking to Eric and I trust him and I want to take it to the next level, but do I really want to? I don't want to drop my protein in almost half. So, but I didn't ask her to. I didn't go to her and say, hey, let's get you down to 2.2. That's like my upper end recommendation for the off season, and you're at 4. I'm not going to slash her protein in half. So what I asked her to do, hey, let's stay between like 2.5 and 3.
Right.
And it's not that far from what you're doing.
Yeah, that's
You
still a
already
lot.
are. It's a lot.
Yeah.
It's way more than needed, but it freed up like 100 calories of other stuff for her. And then I just knew, like, all right, this won't scare her, and it'll give her the opportunity to eat another, 20, 30 grams of carbs and fat and see how she feels. And that's how I introduced it, so that I didn't potentially nocebo her, and I gave her the opportunity to feel the effects of having more balanced meals from an enjoyment standpoint, and then potentially perform better, which is exactly what happened. And then I was able to cut it down a little more, and we eventually got her down to something that started with 2 on a regular basis, which I saw was a huge win. But just like it would have been harmful for me to tell her to cut her protein in half, it's a great way to make someone feel like, fitness is impossible, to tell them, oh, you're only eating 50 grams. Well, we need to get you to 120. It's like, wow, I need to more than double my protein intake, bro. Like, but they would get better outcomes if you just told them to try to get 275, So I think that's a great way to do it. What you're doing is suggesting people to make these incremental changes based upon where they're at. And sure, it'd be great to get everybody to that, 1.6 gram per kg or higher point. And the data would suggest that if you're on a vegan diet, and you're eating at least 3 meals per day, and you're roughly evenly spreading that amount or more, that'll provide just as good of gains as being on an omnivorous diet, that's great. But 1.4, 1.3 isn't that much worse than 1.6. It might add up over the years and it might be a little less efficient, but it's not black or white. It is a continuum. And far more important than that is like your overall training structure, sleep, your overall energy intake, your rate of weight gain, etc.
All right. And one of the biggest reasons why I started believing that protein is really important is my own personal experience, which I also believe is important, because I felt when I first started taking whey protein, right? It's not because of whey protein, of course, but that 50 grams of additional protein in my diet definitely made a change. Here it
Yeah.
is believed, a lot of youngsters, like 18, 19-year-old people, kids, younger people, they think that whey protein is the reason why they started making gains. It's not, they don't they don't understand that they just added an additional 50 grams of protein in their diet, which is probably
Mm.
why they put on muscle. So for me, there was a phase when I was a vegetarian, because all ethical reasons and whatnot, but I could feel that I was not making gains, and I was kind of an intermediate during that time. So I was feeling that I was not making the same amount of gains. And over here we don't get all the beyond meats and all that. We don't have so many options. We need to stick to your cottage cheese. Here we call it
Hmm.
as paneer, and it's 25 grams of fat per 100 grams. You get 15 grams of
Yeah.
protein but 25 grams of fat. So it was very hard for me. And another question that I wanted to ask is regarding soy.
Mm.
Now there's been enough information and studies on this, but I would love to hear from you regarding soy, because that's a very common source over here, and in many Asian countries as well. Soy chunks or tofu and all that, right? So how is there any kind of negative effects for men when they consume soy? Because this is a question I get every single day. How much protein can I get from soy per day, without
Yeah.
causing man boobs or something like that?
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Right.
So the main concern is phytoestrogens that come from soy isoflavones, and there has been alarmism over the years as to high soy protein consumption or soy product consumption in general, and that having an estrogenic like effect on men. And I have waffled on this because the data is just not that good. But when I last looked into this deeply, I was really unconvinced by any potential quote unquote estrogenizing effects. I didn't see any good data to support that when you look at the totality of the evidence. And then there's a very small amount of data that is not, it's not very convincing, but I'm not confident to fully dismiss it either, because it's potentially important. That suggests there might be some differences in sperm quantity and quality when you're consuming very high amounts of soy, but there's small differences and they may or may not matter. And I don't think they're like irreversible or anything like that. And like, who cares unless you're trying to have kids, right?
Right.
So, and we're talking about very high intakes. So I would say for the most part, like if you're getting 2 to 3 servings of a fair amount of soy protein in a given day, nothing to worry about. Now, if you were to go onto a level of soy protein that has not really been like well investigated, I can't be confident in saying there's no issue. Like if you're like, yeah, I currently consume 50 grams of protein, and now I'm going to take another 100 grams of soy protein a day, every day, then I'd be like, I'd prefer you get some like pea protein source or something else to get that in if you can, rice protein blends or what have you. But it's not going to harm you in any way that I could just look at you and say, oh, in 3 months you're going to die or anything like that. It's nothing like that. It's just it could possibly have some effects in that realm. And I don't have enough data to say that I'm confident it won't be any issue.
Yeah, and also as far as soy goes, how good of a protein source is that? Like, and I also believe that vegetarians should be mixing different sources of protein rather than just having one. So according to what you said, having 40 grams of protein from soy shouldn't be that bad, right?
No, like, yeah, I mean, you generally, if you're a vegan, especially if you're a vegan, less important if you're a vegetarian, if you're getting, dairy or any kind of egg-based sources, then it matters far less because that's very abundant in a variety of amino acids. But yeah, if you're a vegan, especially if you're a vegan on a low protein diet, it's difficult to get the full complement, the full spectrum of essential amino acids. So when you are trying to increase your protein intake and stay vegan, it's not a bad idea to have a fair amount of different protein sources in your diet. You know, like if you're 50-50, like let's say you're getting yourself up to that 150 gram mark and 75 grams of it is supplemental protein and the other 75 grams is from mixed food sources, it probably doesn't matter if those 75 grams are mostly from soy. It's still complete. It's not it's not whey, it's not fantastic, but it won't make that big of a difference as long as your total protein intake is sufficient.
Right. Yeah. So since we are on the topic of protein, another thing we already know that the whole anabolic window concept is not that important of a thing. But do you really think that spreading your protein intake through 4 to 5 meals would be better compared to eating, let's say, 3 huge meals with 50 grams of protein per meal? Is there any difference based on the data? And also, you have your monthly subscription, right, of MAST. So if you guys are interested in going through, it's basically meta-analysis, right? So if you're
I would say
interested,
it's us, reviewing a given study, and we do our best to think about all the other research that's been published on it. So it's more like kind of like an in-house systematic review of each one of the studies. But sometimes there's just not enough, like if we're reviewing like the third study on a topic, yeah, it's a systematic review, but I mean, how much can you even know if that's the third one? But yeah. No, I appreciate that shout out. And yeah, we cover research that comes out on a monthly basis as it relates to strength and physique sport and
yeah,
muscle gain.
because a lot of people struggle to stay up to date with what's being thrown out these days, and there's a lot of conflicting information, because with the scholars in this field, what usually happens is it becomes hard for them to stay unbiased, where they kind of have their own set beliefs, and when a study comes out which kind of doesn't match up with their own beliefs, they tend to twist it and manipulate it and all that, right? So regarding protein, your thoughts on protein intake, being, let's say, I know it's not that big of a deal, but splitting your protein into smaller portions throughout the day,
Sure.
how your traditional bodybuilders used to do, or it's okay to have 3 big meals. I tend to have 3 big meals because my day is designed in a way where I don't have the time to eat 5 times a day. So
Yep.
does it really make much of a difference? I don't think it does for me, but what do you think in terms of the studies and data
Yep.
that has covered this?
So two main comments. One is if someone is a scholar in their field, they don't manipulate they update their beliefs as research comes out. And if you see someone consistently not doing that, no matter what they call themselves, are not a scholar in the field. That's my arrogant science perspective.
No,
But
definitely agree with that. Definitely agree with that.
but of course, the barrier for being like a scholar in the bodybuilding field is basically like, do I have big arms and do I have a YouTube channel? So that's not necessarily, I can understand. Okay. The second thing I would say is it really depends on what do we decide is the threshold for what we consider credible evidence on this. And then two, the audience who I'm talking to, like how much are they trying to obsessively manipulate everything to get every ounce of gains versus are they trying to get the big rocks in place and make gains that are quote unquote good. And it's slightly different. So if you said, Shreyas, if you told me, Eric, show me a study where people gain more muscle consuming the same amount of protein, but eating it 4 or 5 times a day versus 3, I'd be like, I got nothing for you, bro. Like that doesn't exist. And I've actually had some debates going back and forth in peer review with Eric Trexler, who was my nutrition counterpart in Mass, where I made a recommendation for like bodybuilders, right? And I'm like, if you really put a gun to my head, I think probably you want maybe 4 meals or more, just based on mechanistic studies, like our understanding of the time courses and the peaks and valleys in muscle protein synthesis, and our understanding of digestion time courses. But that data is all over the place, often self-conflicting, and it's a snapshot of a proxy measure. So it doesn't perfectly correlate or even reasonably accurately predict hypertrophy long-term. Like a lot of conditions have to be met first for us to to have it actually match up. Like we can't just be using the typical amino acid tracer method. We have to actually do a biopsy and look at the amount of incorporated deuterium water from muscle protein synthesis. And then we do that after the first couple of weeks of training when there's not a lot of muscle damage, and we correct for any muscle damage we see, and then we can see a strong relationship with hypertrophy.
Right.
So
That's difficult, right?
Yes.
Right.
So for me to have, so that's why you don't just go, oh, I found an MPS study that suggests, whey protein is better than casein, so therefore I'm never going to eat casein again because I want to get all the gains. Like, come on, bro. It's like it's a 4-hour study. Like, what are we talking about here? So honestly, really, if you want to have the best evidence, you want to be looking at things that actually measure hypertrophy over time and then compare, ecologically valid conditions, like people lifting, assuming the same amount, different meal sources or meal distributions. And in that case, the only conclusion you can really come away from is so long as you're getting at least 3 meals per day, and you're getting at least that kind of 1.6 grams per kg, I can't say it's not optimal. However, if you told me I want to become the next Mr. Olympia and I'm willing to bet on things that might have a neutral to positive effect, even if the long-term training data is not there, but we have some mechanistic understandings of how this could be better, I'd be like, all right, let's get 4 meals. Let's get some slow digesting protein in within a couple hours going to bed. And then, believe it or not, casein is not that slow of a digesting protein. Pretty much, it's just slower than whey. Everything else is actually slower than casein. It's just a way for protein supplement companies to sell that other fraction of milk. But so anyway, and then I'd say, hey, like within a couple hours on either side of your workout, it'd be good to get another meal that has protein in it, and then maybe eat protein when you first wake up. So what I might recommend for a bodybuilder would be like, okay, eat protein at breakfast, have lunch, train, have a post-workout shake, and then have a late dinner that isn't made of whey around 8 p.m. and go to bed. And that'd be like my minimum frequency, right? But for literally everybody else who's not like an obsessive nerd who wants just the last little ounce of possible gains, if you get 3 roughly evenly spaced and roughly evenly distributed meals that have protein that are sufficient to add up to get you to the amounts we've talked about, you're good to go.
Right. So it's not that much of a difference, but if you want to obsess over it, it can be beneficial, right? So see, it depends on the type of work you do or job you do, because over here people mostly do like 9 to 5s, and it's all a hassle. They wake up, they have whatever is prepared at home, and they just run to the office, and in that sense, it kind of gets difficult. So in the long run, I don't think it makes that much of a difference, right?
Definitely not. There's bigger fish to fry.
Right. All right. So supplementation is looked at as something very like a religion over here in the bodybuilding community, because we get bombarded with ads all the time from supplement companies. As a YouTuber whose part of my job is also to promote certain products, I try to restrict myself, because most of these supplements are don't do anything. We all know that. So I try to keep it simple, but first I want to get whey protein out of the way, because a lot of people even make videos, believe it or not, over here, where they say, title the video, I got this much gains with this particular whey protein. So I think we both can agree that whey protein is just a way to help you hit your protein intake, right? Nothing more than that. Right. So the other thing is there a limit that people should be not exceeding when it comes to whey protein? Is it, let's say you can't get protein for some reason from food, is it okay if you take 3 to 4 scoops? Because there was a time when I was doing that, when I was very lazy with cooking and all that. I was very heavy, like I was almost like 250 to 70 kind of obese kind of physique, and I was having huge appetite, right? So I used to take protein, but I felt that it did not help me much, because it was liquid, right? Basically it did not help me that much with the satiety. But do you think that taking 2 to 3 scoops for most people should be fine, right? It should not
there's no issue with that. I mean, all whey is a fraction of milk, and then it's just isolated and made into a powder. So there's really no potential harm in it, so long as it's manufactured well and it's not contained. And it is just, if it's just whey protein, then that's fine,
Right,
you know.
right,
So
right. All right. So next supplement that I want to talk about, actually there are two, would be your branch chain amino acids and your essential amino acids, right? So these are
yep.
getting traction these days. A lot of new products are being launched in the market, and I was going through research today, not research, a post by Alan Argan. He said that as long as your protein intake is fulfilled, it should not make much of a difference, right? And people over here, they use BCAs, like especially vegetarians, they use BCAs a lot, thinking that because their diet is kind of people kind of blame them, saying that your vegetarian sources are not complete sources of protein and
Mm.
whatnot. It's kind of getting popular in this country, in India, because of the, like I said, a lot of people are vegetarians over here. So what are your thoughts on BCA supplementation and or EAA supplementation?
Yeah. So the whole reason why, protein powder is popular is because it has higher protein. And protein is made up of the building blocks of amino acids. And the essential amino acids specifically, those 9 amino acids, are the ones that are principally involved in muscle building. Not that we don't need the non-essential amino acids, it's just that our body can produce them in ample amounts and convert them from other things. However, the essential ones we need to get from our diet, and they are involved specifically in building muscle. So, but there's nothing magic about isolated groups or individual amino acids beyond what is provided from protein, right? Um, the branched chain amino acids and a few other amino acids can be metabolized directly in muscle instead of, getting broken down and converted in other areas and then turned into a different type of fuel. But I mean, so can glycogen, right? So can glucose, right? So there's not really, and also, like, most of the data for like bodybuilding style training, especially like a split routine, doesn't suggest that you need to have a pre-workout carbohydrate supplement, right? So fueling prior to training is not really an issue, which is kind of the only rationale for, why you would want to have a faster quote unquote version of whey, which is basically what an EAA or BCAA supplement would be. And the data would suggest that, yeah, BCAAs are better than nothing for reducing like muscle soreness and muscle damage, and in very limited instances, potentially improving a body composition or performance outcome. But that's only when they're compared to like a water. Like, when you start to look at comparisons between the same total amount of protein and one group taking BCA or not, the data pretty much goes almost completely silent to suggest there's any benefit from it. And there's no reason we would expect there to be any benefit from it. So I think, maybe if you're vegan and you don't want to consume whey protein, you would think, okay, I want to isolate an amino acid. But I would probably suggest that you spend your money on something like a pea protein, which is high in essential amino acids and branched chain amino acids, that is more affordable. Because there's really just no need to supplement with branched chain amino acids. They're typically quite expensive. Essential amino acids is slightly better just because it's the full complement of the essential amino acids. But again, protein has them as well. So I can't think of many scenarios where I would recommend either BCA or EAA to anybody.
Right. And even if you're deficient in protein, you might as well go and buy, like you said, a protein supplement,
Protein.
right? Right. Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. So BCA is, I agree with you. I think it is. I used to see, of course, I've been through that phase where I was also sucked in by all these ads and everything. But, it's kind of hard to convince people, especially because they kind of idolize certain
Yeah.
bodybuilders and the way they look. And they believe that they are going to end up just like them. They'll end up looking like them. So yeah, BCAs is another supplement that's in the is being that's being hyped up these days is
Yeah.
turkesterone. Okay, now
Mm.
right. So I'm pretty sure you're aware of this. So you have been in this industry for what? I've been following you since 2012, I would say. So you've been there even before that, right? And you've been
Yeah.
there since the pro hormones era and all that, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah. I
so
bought my first supplements because I was a bright-eyed young individual who wanted to look like the guys in the ads in 2004 was when I first was a consumer rather than someone who understood what I was, potentially doing.
So
So
when did
yeah,
you
it's
first
been
start
18
lifting?
years, 2004.
Four. So, yeah, so 18
Yeah.
years. That's a hell of a long time. So, Turkesterone. Now, I've gone through the studies, whatever basic information we have, but
Lack of studies.
lack of studies, right? So, do you really think that it does anything from what you have read on that? And if you have read on that, like, do you think that it does anything other than making someone feel good and they just push harder in the gym and make some better gains than they would have otherwise?
As an honest scientist, the only thing I can say is that there's two things. One, there's a lack of any data to suggest that this supplement would be beneficial. But I also have to remind people that, like, before creatine was studied, there was a lack of any data to suggest that creatine would be beneficial. However, creatine, there's a strong rationale for why it would be beneficial. I mean, like, it's our primary high intensity ATP recycler, and it's stored in muscle and hydrates muscle cells and leads to anabolic signaling, right? So yeah, of course creatine works. But turkesterone, the proposed mechanism doesn't make any sense. The same, so like powerful drugs that act on the same estrogen agonist pathway don't cause hypertrophy, don't cause muscle growth. So why would a weaker version of that is a food source supplement do anything? So we don't have a mechanism to think it would work. Then we have no research whatsoever.
Right, right.
So
Yeah,
yeah, I don't
because
really see the point.
it doesn't show that it increases your testosterone. It doesn't boost your muscle protein synthesis that much. So, I mean, what's the way? You're just convincing yourself that it's going to work. And this is what I believe. People tend to believe something hard, and they go to the gym, they push even harder, and probably make some gains, right? And most of these before after pictures that you see, they are kind of not a realistic. Uh,
Shreyas,
yeah,
have you ever seen the studies on placebo steroids?
maybe, but yeah,
They are wild. They're
right.
wild, bro. So what they do is they get people into these resistance training trials, and they tell people they're giving them anabolic steroids, and they make really really good progress. Like not the same progress you'd make from actual anabolic steroids, but better than control groups and groups that aren't being told that, and like massive gains. So I think, you mentioned how many people view supplementation as almost a religion over there. And that's, I mean, I can't even say that's specific to India. I don't, of course, Indian culture much better than I do, but lifting culture in general, there are pockets of people who are heavily influenced by the supplement industry, and bodybuilding is the most dominant one. And the way that supplements that don't work is through what's called the placebo effect. So if I want to do a trial of a supplement, I need to have a group that is not taking it. I need to have a group that is taking it. And then I need to have a group that I think and they think, or we don't know, is taking it. That's the placebo group. So I don't know which group is which. And then we need to compare whether did the actual supplement group do better than the group that took nothing? And did it also do better than the group that took the placebo? And more often than not, what you're going to see is both the placebo group and the actual supplement group did better than the nothing group, but not better than one another, which indicates that it was the belief in the supplement having an effect that was driving the effect. And if there was a real effect, you would see the effect of the supplement on top of that effect of belief. So like the placebo group would give an additional 3% over the nothing group. And then the group in the supplement trial would get 5%, and 2% on top of that. So the placebo effect is driven based on expectation. So when humans have an expectation of something, their mindset influences their physiology and their effort, like you were saying, such that occurs. They have a rosy outlook on everything, and they're like, oh, I'm going to get some good gains. It's going to be a great block. They're able to interpret and rationalize everything through a positive lens because that's what they're expecting. And there are also nocebo effects, which is why it's dangerous. And you'll hear like the physiotherapist community be like, don't tell people that's bad form when you don't actually know it. Like you can make people feel knee pain or feel like they have a back issue if you make them super nervous and scared about it, or they'll associate something they do every day and have done with back pain. And then they'll be, they're super phobic of squats now or deadlifts. So you have to be careful with belief. And that's something we have to control for in research. And the strength of your belief can dictate the strength of the placebo effect. So when you see these massive effects in these placebo steroid groups, it speaks not to the magic of these placebo steroids, but it speaks to the expectations and beliefs people have around anabolics. And if you have that same thing in supplements, like if you expect that, the three pillars, like training, nutrition, and supplements, for me, it's like, those aren't three pillars. Like the supplements are doing like 1/1000th of the effect of your training and nutrition. I'm exaggerating, but they're doing such a tiny little piece of the puzzle. But if you have a zealous belief that they're going to have a massive effect, that can play a role. And I think also what comes into it sometimes is that people don't think they have it within them. Like I don't have good genetics. I can't make gains. So I can't have faith in myself, but I can put faith in this supplement. And then all of a sudden they start making gains. So I think it is often the people who are most susceptible to supplement marketing who get the most out of the placebo effect, because they're looking for something because they don't believe that they have the genetics or the work ethic or the talent or whatever to get it. So they need something else to put their faith in, and they're able to make progress. So
right, in the real world, it comes at $50 a month, right? The placebo comes at $50 a month as well.
That's right.
Right. So regarding, I just wanted to discuss turkesterone for the same reason that a lot of people, it's not yet, the wave hasn't come to India yet, because we have to get it from the States. But definitely I can feel that people are believing in it more and more. Now, another supplement that's very popular in India is ashwagandha. Now, ashwagandha, you find it in the northeast part of our country as well. So there are, if I go to examine.com and I go through a couple of studies, it says that it kind of helps with the stress, right? Now I do have issues with anxiety and all that. That's a big reason why I'm not able to sleep. I have issues with sleep and anxiety and all that. So we're talking about placebo. Now for me, I've been taking ashwagandha for the last couple of years, and I don't know if it actually helps me or not, but I feel better. So that's the perfect example of what we spoke about turkesterone as well. So what are your thoughts on ashwagandha, like, and what kind of people can benefit from that?
Yeah, I'm not super well read on ashwagandha, because I'm very much a sports and strength physique scientist. I'm a strength sport and physique sport scientist. I focus on things that have more obvious and direct applications versus kind of things that are a little more peripheral in the health and fitness space. So from what I remember, I think ashwagandha falls into the class of being an adaptogen. So the idea is that it helps you deal with stress and build more resiliency to it. So it basically helps you reattain hormesis, or a homeostatic state in response to stressors, which, is definitely a thing that exists in biochemistry. But it also is really easy to therefore push as this kind of like a cure-all. It does everything great for all things. And one area that's relatively weak in terms of its research, but I think it has a few positive findings, is the effects of ashwagandha on performance. So I have seen like a study or two, and I know that Greg reviewed one in MAST that suggested that it could potentially improve performance. I don't remember the specifics of the resistance training trial, but I know of at least a study or two that suggests that it might have some small effect. It's a tough one though, like anytime. This is an interesting thing when I've seen as well. Sometimes I will see like herbal products that come out of China that have cultural significance that have been researched. And sometimes I will notice that when those are researched outside of labs in China, they often don't have a significant effect, but when they're researched there, they do. And I don't know if that's a supply chain issue. I don't know if that's a bias in the actual researchers because they're expecting an effect because they're, the researchers themselves are part of Chinese culture. And I suspect that probably happens in every region and to do with expectations ubiquitously. So there's not enough for me to look at ashwagandha well, first off, I'm not an expert. I haven't read all the research, but just from my memory of doing peer review on Greg's article when he wrote it, I was like, oh, this is an interesting area of research. I wonder where it'll go. But it's not one of the like the big like top tier supplements for me where I would be like, yep, I want to do that. But as far as I understand it, yeah, that's a rationale for it. Is if you have higher stress levels, that's what it would work for.
Right, and the best thing with ashwagandha over here is it's dirt cheap over here. It's it's not at all expensive. It's very cheap. So that's definitely a supplement that a lot of people use. And I don't know if you've heard of this. I recently came across this on Joe Rogan's podcast with Dr. Huberman, and he was talking about this Tongat Ali, like and I'm not gonna lie, I tried it out. My stomach was done for the next couple of days after I took it. Okay, maybe I didn't get the best quality one because it's very hard to find, but have you heard anything about that? Because I'm pretty sure 99% of people who are watching this have never heard of this. So I just wanted to know if you've heard of this.
Yeah, I've heard of it, and it's not the first time I've seen it around the block. Like Yohimbine, Long Jack, I think that's Uricoma something. I can't remember the actual. But yeah, Tongat Ali. There's those have been cyclically coming around, along with Tribulus terrestris. There's another one, horny goatweed. I've been aware of those since the very beginning of time that I got into bodybuilding. They will rise in popularity and then fall off, and rise in popularity and fall off, and most of the time they're virility, male health, or testosterone boosting supplements. But a lot of the times they can't say testosterone boosting supplements because all the data suggests they don't boost testosterone. But they do show, they feel better or whatever. So the thing is I have seen so many failed testosterone boosting supplements. And more importantly, it just doesn't make any difference. Like how often I run into people who are like, well, this is their logic train. Anabolic steroids work great. And that's adding testosterone to your body. And these guys are way bigger than the natties. I wonder if I can get a little bit of that, but legally. And I'm like, they're on like 15 times your testosterone levels. You're talking about an herb that might potentially increase your endogenous stores by like 5%. And then you want to find studies or people putting their blood work up to show that small increase, and you think that'll translate to something. Yet, like, women make gains, and they have like 1/10 of your testosterone levels. And like within the normal range, there's very itty bitty differences between the amount of muscle you can build. It's just not a major factor until we're talking about huge increases or huge decreases. Like when a natural bodybuilder diets all the way down to stage condition, and they're at 1/4 of their normal testosterone levels, and they often lose a little bit of muscle mass. That's probably part of the process, but going from, like 500 to 550 is going to do zippity doo dah day. I mean, that's your normal diurnal variation in testosterone is sometimes going to be, 80% of what it was, or 120% of when you got it tested. So it just doesn't. If people are taking Tongat Ali from the perspective of seeing it as a testosterone booster, which is when I first encountered it, 15 years ago, I just don't. I'm not expecting much out of it. If maybe there's new studies on a different thing that it's supposed to do, I'm not aware of it. So
and even if it increases your testosterone, it's probably not going to be used to building muscle. People think that testosterone, the more you have, it's good to have more. But just going from 500 to 550, like you said, that 50 nanogram per deciliter, it's not going to be used just for building muscle, right? It can be used for anything, right? It's not just for building.
It just won't matter.
Yeah, and like you said, if I check my blood right now, my testosterone is probably going to be very low because I didn't have a good night's sleep, stress and all that. So there are a lot of factors. But okay, now coming to I if I'm not wrong, are you going to compete anytime soon?
2023, I plan to get back on stage.
Okay, so now that you're going to be on a prep, so what supplement recommendations would you have for a bodybuilder, natural bodybuilder who is planning to compete? Now I want to go into that as well, because but before that, important question. This question has been asked by every teenager in this country and over the world, is regarding masturbation. Now, I
Oh,
mean,
okay.
right? So
Fun
that,
times.
right? Yeah. So sometimes, yeah, that is the key word. But like, does it really
I said fun times, not
fun
sometimes.
times? Okay.
I know teenagers aren't going to be doing it sometimes. I
Okay.
mean,
Right.
I
Exactly.
spent too much time.
Right.
Let's just carry on. Let's just say
Yeah.
I was your normal teenage boy.
Right. So the same here. So the question that I get a lot is teenagers usually, I mean, people usually get into training during their teenage years, and masturbation and sexual encounters and all that is a part of their, growing up, right? So the question that I usually get is, does it have any effect on the gains that I'm gonna make? Will I,
No,
make no, right?
just wash your hands afterwards before you go to the gym. That's
Yeah.
the only comment I have on that that's worthwhile.
Right,
You know,
right. So it doesn't make a difference, right? Yeah. So yeah,
not at all.
as simple as that. Just I should have put that in a rapid fire segment.
Yeah, there's a prequel to the rapid fire.
Right. So okay, now what supplements do you take personally? For
Hmm.
your goals. That is something that I wanted to ask for myself as well.
Yeah, so I take creatine monohydrate. I take beta alanine when I'm in bodybuilding phases, but not when I'm in just pure strength sport phases, and citrulline malate and caffeine when I am on certain training days if I'm training earlier in the day.
Right. That's it. Right. Nothing
And
else.
that's it.
Okay.
Yeah.
So multivitamins, no multivitamins, and omega
Oh,
three.
yeah, yeah. So I take fish oil and D3 as well.
Right.
Sorry about that.
So
I was
what?
thinking more from the, yeah.
Yeah, what dose of D3 do you take per day?
I take 1,000 IUs,
Right.
but I think if anyone is going to take D3, they should probably consult with a physician first and actually get their 25 OHD levels checked and make sure they're actually,
Right.
supplementing when they need to instead of wasting money.
My whole family was deficient in vitamin D, so
Mm.
a lot of people have that issue, and there are symptoms of that as well, right? You don't feel
Seasonal depression could be
right.
potentially related to it, but it's also really important. There are potential racial differences in this as well. Like darker skinned people
Right.
typically have lower
Right.
amounts of 25 OHD because they're getting, because of their darker skin, the same amount of sun exposure
It's
doesn't
harder to
result in the same
synthesize.
amount of production. Yeah,
Right.
because you're synthesizing your own vitamin D
Right.
from sun exposure, and then you
Right.
also have dietary sources. And interestingly enough, there is some research, and it's not enough for me to be super confident in it, but just confident enough for me to exercise caution and suggest people talk to their doc first before they just pick up a bottle. That suggests that even though the amounts might be lower in darker skinned people, it doesn't necessarily reflect their health risks or health status. And vitamin D has gotten real popular as of late because of COVID. You look at an epidemiological study and it's like, oh, the people who had low vitamin D were more likely to die of COVID. Well, they're getting the direction of causality wrong, right? When you're sick, vitamin D status drops. So all that's saying is that the people who are more sick were more likely to die. Like no shit, So I think vitamin D is one of the supplements that I think is not unreasonable to supplement with, but you probably should do it from an informed, individualized perspective
Right.
first.
Right.
And yeah,
Right.
so fish
So
oil, vitamin D, and then the ones that I take for
right.
enhancing my workout performance.
Right. So a pro natural bodybuilder takes only the most basic supplements. There's nothing special. You guys don't need to spend extra money, especially the teenagers when your growth potential is very high. Right. Don't
Absolutely.
waste time and money on supplements. So okay. So there's this natural bodybuilding show that's been announced in India for the first time. It's
That's
drug
awesome.
tested, polygraph, and urinalysis. I can't say that word properly. So
It's a hard
that
one.
yeah so that show, right? So there are of course a lot of them are going to be competing for the first time in their life because we never had a platform. So since you are a pro, what advice would you give? Like I would say, like any generic advice, like top 5 advice that people can look into for their first prep. And the show is 4 months away now.
4 months away.
Yeah.
For number one, most people should already be dieting. Okay. So that's if it's 4 months away. That's the big thing that unfortunately, when you're in communities where there aren't a lot of natural bodybuilding competitions, you take advice from the people who are enhanced, and the traditions in enhanced bodybuilding are typically shorter length diets, because it's much easier to crash diet and still maintain muscle mass because you can take a lot of anabolics. Not that all of them do that, but there's enough of it. It's quite ubiquitous, as well as, it is much more common to never go off your anabolics nowadays. You kind of blast and cruise and stuff like that. But back in the day, there were periods where you would not be taking drugs at all. And then you would take it for sometimes people for the period leading up to competition, and you would take it for like 8 to 12 weeks. And that's where 8 to 12 week diets came from. So that it doesn't have a lot of relevance to natural bodybuilders. And for natural bodybuilders to look muscular, muscularity is not just about the size of your muscles, but also about the appearance of their definition and their separation and how many striations they have in them. So the biggest tool that natural bodybuilders have to look good on stage is to get quite lean. And to do that without losing a bunch of muscles, so that you can actually have something to separate when you're separated and lean, you need to maintain your muscle mass, which means you need to diet a little slower than your enhanced, brethren and sisters might. So generally, I advise people dieting, especially for their first time, like 20 weeks plus is what it takes to get into really good shape. Not that you need to be, getting on stage with striated glutes the first time you ever compete. Just getting into the best shape of your life and experiencing what it's like to compete is a really good thing. So if you want to do the show and you're planning to start 3 months out, I'm not saying, no, you shouldn't have done it. You should have started 2 months ago. I'm saying, hey, you're still going to be in your best shape ever if this is your first show, if you start dieting now, but probably start dieting now.
Right. They missed a trick where they announced the show recently, so we couldn't do much. I mean, the athletes couldn't do much
Sure.
because the show was announced. But definitely, I think the rule applies for average people who are just trying to cut as well, right? When you're cutting naturally, the building muscle is a luxury, after a
Yep.
certain point of time. And a lot of people go for these 12-week transformations and all that, and end up losing a lot of muscle. They do get shredded,
Yeah.
but the quality of muscle mass, it's not the same. It's just that they have abs, they go for good lighting and whatnot, but definitely preserving muscle mass should be the number one.
It's bodybuilding, right?
Right, right.
And even if you look at 12-week transformations, like the average one of someone who is, not heavily super heavy or overweight before, but they went from maybe just kind of average, slightly on the heavier side physique to, whoa, that's pretty impressive. That person is probably still 15 pounds over stage weight in their after picture. It's like, yeah, just having abs, if you're competing in like the bodybuilding division and you want to do really well. And again, this is speaking for someone who's trying to compete at like the pro level and get my pro card in a highly competitive federation like the WNBF. Like, I mean, I am 6 foot and I competed 180 pounds. Most people are like, oh, that's really small, and I am a little on the smaller side for pros, especially. But I have competed at 190 and I'm less impressive because I'm just not lean enough. I don't have the separation I need everywhere, in my earlier days, like 09 and things like that. So I think most beginners really underestimate how much fat they have to lose and how hard the last, 10 pounds are to get to come off. And it's okay if you don't get those off your first time competing. It's something for you to work on. This is, like any sport, you get better at it over time. You don't expect to be Michael Jordan the first time you pick up basketball. So it's okay if you're not going to get shredded, but give yourself the best fighting chance to get in good shape. And so you don't have to crash diet, because the risks of bodybuilding are that you can develop some pretty unhealthy behaviors with your body image and your eating. And you want to be able to find a pathway back to normalcy in the off season or normal-ish, because you're still, bodybuilding. And that's really hard to do. And most people, and then my second piece of advice is have a plan for after the show. Take yourself out of a deficit and try to put on, say, like, get back to being 10% over stage weight within 2 months. And that's a pretty aggressive surplus. Because if you don't have a plan, it can very easily turn into like just constant binge eating, right? So on either end of the spectrum of what you shouldn't do is your plan post-show is a list of restaurants. That's going to go really bad and it's going to get out of hand. And then you're going to feel like you have to start dieting because you don't like that you're actually overshooting where you started your contest prep. Or on the other side, being super, super neurotic and trying to stay lean after the show, forgetting that it is, again, bodybuilding and that the only reason you're getting shredded is to get on stage and to compete. But in the off season, you need to have a healthy, holistic lifestyle that is supportive of muscle building. And somewhere in between, where you're getting into an aggressive surplus and you're bulking post show, but you're not binging, is what you want to do. So you want to have an exit strategy to where, you take it aggressive, but not super aggressive or super neurotic post shows, that you can, put on that body fat that'll get you back into a healthy hormonal state. It's going to take some time before you actually feel satiated. You're going to be surprised. You're going to go out after the show and you're going to have this massive meal and celebrate the first time you got on stage. And you're going to eat an appetizer, a dinner, a dessert, and you're going to be hungry. And you're going to be like, what the hell is going on? And you're like, whatever, I earned it. And then you're going to think, okay, that was in the past. And then Sunday comes around and you're going to eat a second lunch and you're going to be starving afterwards. And you're going to be like, oh my God, am I broken? Because this can last for weeks. So you kind of have to pretend to be like a normal, healthy human adult again, who knows how to eat, but still being in a surplus and putting, the goal is actually to regain some body fat, but you don't want it to turn into like this cyclical, binge and purge pattern, which it really can quite easily. So have an exit strategy, give yourself enough time to diet down, which means you won't crash diet as hard, which means you won't rebound as hard, and practice your posing early, because it really does matter. And make sure that you are very confident in what you're going to be doing, what the mandatory poses are, and that you have some basic choreography for your routine if you're in a division that has a routine before you go out there. And if you do those three things, you'll enjoy the process a lot more than if you don't think about posing until you're a week out. You may nervous wreck when you're already fatigued and starving, and you're going to hate the process of trying to get shredded because you only have a little bit of time to do it. And it's going to feel just like the only thing you can focus on for 8 to 12 weeks. And then you're going to be really surprised at how bad that rebound can be post show if you don't have a strategy coming out of it.
Right. So yeah, it's not just about getting on stage, it's what you do after the show as well. Right.
Absolutely.
Right. So I just have another question that I get asked a lot, especially because of the whole pandemic, is regarding a lot of people are getting back to training now, right? Because they've been on a huge break, and the whole muscle memory concept and how to get back into a gym, into the gym, let's say after a huge break, like 6 months, 8 months, or even 1 year, right? Like, are you considered to be a virgin again, or like that, like, are you considered to be a beginner again, or you can just take a couple of weeks to get into the groove and go back to your old style of programming? So how even I am confused about this for myself as well. I also had a injury and had a short break, but I just went all out. I didn't care. But what would you recommend to people who get back to the gym?
Good question. It totally depends on how truly off you were from training. How much were you able to get in 2 sessions a week when you normally train 5, or were you completely off, and then for how long? So if you had a 3-month layoff of not training at all, that is very different than, we had intermittent lockdowns and I did body weight training and, pull-ups on a juggle gym outside and single leg squats, 3 times a week. And sometimes it was really difficult and I hated it. So I did it twice a week. If you're in the latter situation where you're able to do something, then it's a matter of just slowly getting back into it. You don't want to spike your workload and do a bunch of things you aren't accustomed to. Because even if you did go balls out and get back into it, you're going to get incredibly sore. And then that week of training is basically just going to be preparing you for the next. And when you're trying to get unsore, and it's not going to be that productive. And you don't need that much. So here's the thing is, we talked about why do newbies gain so much strength and muscle so quickly, is because they're unaccustomed to that level of stimulus. Someone who is detrained is in the same boat, So if it is very easy, you talked about muscle memory, to regain muscle you've had. There are neuromuscular reasons for this, and there are potentially local reasons for this as well, related to retention of satellite cells and keeping the same myonuclear domain, which just means the amount of muscle tissue that can be potentially governed from the muscle cells themselves and the number of nuclei they have, so that they can rapidly get back to where they were. And there are hypotheses related to this being a mammalian adaptation related to going through periods of famine during the winter and then coming back and not needing, it wouldn't be helpful if creatures need to hunt and forage, cyclically lost all their muscle mass, every time they barely survived a winter. There is some data that suggests maybe that is or isn't happening in all species, and how long does it take and to what degree and how long does it last. But ultimately, it probably scales with how much time you spent training. So if you spent 10 years in the gym and you take 3 months off, that's much less of an effect than if you've been training for 6 months and you took 3 months off, right? So that latter person, I mean, they weren't even done with their newbie gains before they detrained some of them. So they won't have developed a whole lot of quote unquote muscle memory. But that person who's been in the gym 10 years, they might find that in a month and a half, they're right back to where they were, even though they took 3 months off. But getting back to where you were, you should probably start with, okay, what am I currently doing now? And then go from there versus what was I doing before the layoff and going to that. So if you're not training at all right now and you've taken 2 weeks off, maybe go to something like 50% of what you would normally do and then build back up over a few weeks to get back. But if you've taken multiple months off, then you probably want to treat it like you're a novice again. Like we talked about, what should a novice do when they first get into the gym? Do that. And then when that stops working to help you regain the muscle you had, then go up to something more like if you were an intermediate, and then eventually work back towards, if you need to, what you're currently doing. But the beauty of COVID and time off is it actually gives you an opportunity to evaluate whether you were doing far more than you needed to progress or not. And sometimes I've ran into a lot of people who are like, yeah, I was doing like 20 sets per week per muscle group, and now I'm doing 12 and growing better. And I'm like, well, how did you find that out? They're like, well, I was doing 0 for 3 months, and then I got back into it with COVID. I'm like, oh, okay, yeah. So that does happen.
Right. I used to post my, just like you post your workouts once in a while on Instagram. I do the same, and people started asking me like, "Is this all? Is this all
Is
you
that
do?"
it?
Yeah, is that it? And I had to explain them, like, I mean, but the thing is there a limit? Should you not go about 20 sets per week per muscle? Like the recommended range is 10 to 20, right? For most people, is it 20 the maximum that
No,
one should go?
no, because it's so individual. Like the beauty of being involved in research is you get to see like the individual results. Like when you were to study, you just think of the mean, and like, oh, we got this study that suggests, 10 plus sets is better than, 5 to 9 and 1 to 4. But you see there's somebody who did way better on lower, So I think the way it should probably be, so most people are probably going to have an upper and lower bound of the amount of volume that is appropriate for them. And depending on their kind of workload capacity and their conditioning they're in right now, just from a recovery standpoint, they'll be able to handle somewhere in there. When they first start out lifting, they're probably even below that. And they can make progress within that range, and they adapt to it, and you might benefit from bumping it, but there's only a finite point where you get there. So like the average person might, find that they do 14 sets for a while and they plateau. So they go up to 16 sets and they plateau. And they go up to 18 and they plateau, and they go up to 20 and they're just sore all the time. But there might be someone else who you could just replace those 3 numbers with like 6, 8, and 10. And there's probably someone else you could replace them with, 18, 24, and 27 or some shit. I've definitely seen it. They're rare on either side. People who are, for their whole career are never going to do more than 10 sets per muscle group, or people who need to do more than 20 sets per muscle group to progress. But they're not that rare. And I think the important answer is that you probably want to start on the lower end of the reasonable recommendation, and then only increase set volume when you are plateaued and everything else has been taken care of. I made sure my protein's enough. I've checked my sleep. I made sure I'm in a slight surplus. I made sure that I have a good mind-muscle connection, that my technique is done well, that I'm actually in an appropriate proximity to failure. I'm not always training to failure, and I'm not way short of it. And then once you've ticked all of those boxes and you're still plateaued and you understand what a plateau means, it's like I'm literally not making progress, not just I want to be as big as the guy on Instagram, then that's when you go, all right, let me bump my volume by like 20%. So that's an individualized increase, not just a random number of sets. So if you're at 10 sets per week and you've plateaued and everything's, on track, go to 12 per muscle group, not 20, which is what most people do. Like, oh, I need to try a high volume program. They just go into an arbitrarily high amount. And we have research that suggests an individualized increase in volume is more likely to increase, your hypertrophy to a greater extent than just just a flat change, regardless of where
Right.
you were previously.
Right. Going
So I
from
think
one,
that's the way you view it.
yeah, going from one extreme to another. That's what you mean, right? It's not that
Exactly.
great. You gradually increase. So yeah, this is regarding muscle memory. Now this is like the longest podcast that I've done, and you have answered every single question with such honesty and at such length as well. So before we end, I just want to do a rapid fire.
Let's do it.
Just a section that I've added, and just as a fun section. So to start off, what is the one thing that you would like to change about the fitness industry as a whole?
Focusing on sustainability rather than immediate outcomes.
Right, good. Okay, another question. I think I know the answer to this, but the office or friends?
The office.
Great, good. A mistake you wish you didn't do when you started training?
Wasting money on a ton of supplements that did nothing.
Right. Okay, coming to supplements, an overrated supplement according to you?
Most things that aren't creatine.
Okay, so creatine is one thing you really think that has to be a part of.
Doesn't have to be, but it's definitely not overrated.
Yeah.
The hype is backed by data.
Okay. So the next question is an underrated supplement according to you that doesn't get its uh, doesn't shine that much.
I can't think of any,
You can't
to be
think of
honest,
any.
because
Okay.
supplements just don't do that much. So it's very
Right.
difficult
Right.
to say like, oh man, everyone needs to be on this one and no one knows about it.
Right. So I'm glad you said that, because a lot of people need to hear that. A comfort food that you wished were more macro friendly.
Pizza.
All right. An exercise that you don't think you will ever stop doing.
Mm. See, I got to think because I'm 39. I got to think about injuries. I got to think about the future. This is so not rapid fire right now. I'm thinking way too hard.
That's fine. That's fine.
Um, some form of bench press.
Right. Right. A body part that you hate training.
I hate training.
Calves.
Forearms because I don't do it. So there
Okay.
you go.
Forearms. Great. Okay. Now, since I mentioned calves, right? What are your thoughts on the training calves? Like I've tried a lot of different things, but maybe you'll tell me that you haven't tried everything, because
Hmm.
we think that we try everything for our calves, but to be really honest, most of us don't. So is it just like any? And what do you think about your own calves? Like, do you think that you have pretty good calves because you're a
No,
bodybuilder? No, right? So
they're
that's an
not that
answer.
good.
Yeah, so that's the most common answer regarding calves. But I think what I advise people usually with calves is I tell them train them at the beginning of the workout, or try to lift heavy as well, because a lot of people think about the whole slow twitch muscle fibers and whatnot, and they focus on lighter weights when it comes to calves. But I try to tell them lift heavy and all that. So what do you think about that? Like, is there anything?
Yeah, yeah. Like if you had a predominantly slow twitch muscle and training it for higher reps made you grow more, then marathon runners would get jacked off running, right? But that's just not the way it works. So I think, yeah, training them with a sufficient amount of volume is important. I think like for most people on a bro split, like they don't realize that, yeah, they're doing shoulders and arms and they're doing chest and back. Like there's a lot of overlap there, and like back and biceps. Like every time you do a press, you're getting some triceps, and you're getting like a little bit of front delts every time you're doing a curl, and you're getting a little bit of long head of your tricep every time you're doing a shoulder extension, like a lat pull down or a row. So even though you're only doing like maybe 6 to 9 sets on biceps and triceps, you're actually getting more than that. So then when you think the same way, like, oh, another small muscle group, my calves, like they don't get effectively trained by any other lower body exercise. Like, yes, they're technically involved in squats, but ain't nobody getting huge calves off squats, right? Or any, like squat pattern. So you might, like, if you're currently doing like what you typically see people do is they do 6 sets. Like they got 3 seated, calf raises, the 3 standing calf raises, and then they maybe go to 4 sets and they try to see if they can progress. Like I do think it's worthwhile trying 2 things. First, it's just improving the quality of the work. Pause at the bottom a little bit because you've got this long ass tendon that transfers force quite well. Train in both moderate and like low rep ranges, like you were saying. Make sure you get some 6 to 8 close to failure work. Then also get your traditional 8 to 12 or 15 or 20 or whatever you get on calves, and then really try to get a good mind muscle connection. And pause at the bottom of the calves, get them in a good stretch position. So you're training in a long muscle length, and then don't just bounce out of the hole. Actually, then come back up under control. And once you've gotten that, you can feel it. You're not bouncing. You're training, moderate weights and heavy weights, and nothing's growing. Increase volume, and you're probably going to have to do that by increasing frequency because you pretty much only can isolate them. So I like what you said about training them first. Put them at the beginning of your leg days for one, because then you're going to be fresh. They won't take anything out of you so to affect your squats or hinges or anything like that. But the squats and hinges will definitely take it out of you mentally before you want to do calves, and
Right.
they'll be an afterthought, right?
Right.
And then if that doesn't get it done, put them in front of your other days too, like your shoulders and arms day or your chest and back day. Start with calves. Do 3 sets.
You can
And I would
typically
say,
train calves like more than other muscles, right? You can, as in like more frequently.
I think so. I mean, like we walk, so like you'll notice it's pretty hard to make your calves get really sore, so they can handle a decent amount of work in my experience. For most people, don't just arbitrarily go crazy. Like what I said about an individual increase in volume is probably still a good idea. Like if you're currently your typical 6 sets on calves or like 3 to 9 sets on calves, like from there go to like 5 to 12 sets, and somewhere in that range. If that's you, like if you're 3, go to 5. If you're 9, go to 12. Like you can make a slightly more aggressive increase than you might for another muscle group, but don't go hog wild. And then give it a month or two and see if you think you're seeing anything or your performance is going up. And if not, do it again. Go from like 9 to 12 to 15, and see how that goes. And that's what I have found success with. Like my calves aren't good, but I've improved them. I also have a really long Achilles tendon, so they're like my calves start halfway up my tibia, so they're only going to get so good.
Right, but a lot of people don't train their calves enough. I don't train my calves enough, and the main reason is what you said. You do your deadlifts, you do your leg presses, and by the end of it, you're like, I don't care enough about my calves, right? So
Exactly.
that's what happens. So, yeah. Anyway, I really enjoyed it, and I really appreciate that you answered everything, in such a lengthy manner as well. And I think this definitely will help a lot of people. And again, I want to thank you for coming on the show. It's you took 2 hours of your time for me. And
My pleasure, buddy.
yeah, man, thank you so much. And also, Eric is a coach himself. He trains mostly bodybuilders, if I'm not wrong. Or do you train
Yeah. So the company I started with my colleagues back in, late 09 is called 3D Muscle Journey. And I'm the chief science officer for it. I used to be a full-time coach, but as I've gotten into academia and writing and reviewing and science communication, I only have a couple of clients, but I do advise our full-time coaches. And we work with both recreational and competitive natural physique and strength athletes at all levels. So I've had the privilege of working with people who have won pro shows and people who will never compete in a show at all. And if you want to check out all of our information, we have a lot of free resources. We have podcasts, articles, we have courses that are free, also courses that are paid. You can check it out at 3dmusclejourney.com. That is the number 3, the letter D, and musclejourney.com.
3DMJ. So
that's right.
Right. So, and Eric also has his own podcast with Omar Yusuf. So you guys can check that. That's why I wanted to discuss most of the basic stuff on our podcast, and they discuss everything from volume and basically help you build a good physique. So they'll discuss everything over there. And yeah, so thanks a lot for watching, guys, and thank you, Eric, again. And hopefully you have a good time with your bodybuilding prep, because I know that can get really hard. So it's 2023, right? So
Yes, sir.
When are you starting your prep, or has it already bigger
I
now?
will probably start. Well, I'll be competing like mid-year and then towards the end of year. So I'll probably be starting my prep like in February or something like that. So I got like a year of trying to get these calves to grow. So
Like, comment, and subscribe. Eric's links in the description: Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, everything. So thanks a lot, guys. I'll see you again. Peace.
thank you, sir.